non-verbal advocacy. What's 4 plus 2? So let me start with the 4. So in terms of non-verbal advocacy, I would say the eyes, the posture, your posture, hands, and the best one of them all is don't be afraid to use the finger. Now don't get me wrong, calm down everyone. I'm not saying give the tribunal the finger. I'm just saying use the finger in order to gesticulate, to gesture, to emphasize, make a point. And so that's the sort of 4th of my 4. There's obviously the eyes. Eye contact is, to my mind, very important because you can't really be in the business of trying to persuade, whether it's an arbitrator or a judge, or even you're in a mediation, trying to persuade the other side to buy what you are selling, unless you can engage them on a non-verbal level, including using eye contact. Posture is also important. A little bit more difficult to achieve in arbitration because we are seated virtually all of the time.
We've got hand-free mics, so if you want to demonstrate.
Oh, but I usually sort of lean forward because they've got the sort of the tabletop mics. That's another thing. When you are emphasizing a point, perhaps when you are putting a point in cross-examination to a witness not answering, you can lean across, maybe use the finger and say, can you answer my question, please, right? And then, of course, there's hand gesture, again, by way of emphasis. So it's a wholesome way of communicating to the tribunal. Sorry, not wholesome, holistic. That's a better way of putting it. And then the other 2, so there's a +2, and it's to do with the perhaps non-verbal aspect of verbal communication. And the 5th of which is, so the 4 + 2, the number 5, is inflections in the tone of your voice. When there is a point you want to emphasize, emphasize by inflecting the tone of your voice. Also, don't be afraid, in my experience, to use pauses. There is a tendency I often find in hearings where people rush through their submissions and cross-examination like a bullet train. But much more powerful is the ability sometimes just to pause, let the point sink in, or perhaps just to pause before the crescendo moment hits your speech. And that will create a more meaningful impact in terms of your presentation to the tribunal. So that would be my sort of 4 + 2 approach as far as non-verbal advocacy is concerned.
I'm pausing to let the...
Well played.
Now, I don't want you to focus on the content of visual aid because we know that you're bringing in a lot of words into it. But is there an aspect to demonstratives, visual aids that helps with the communication, the power of communication? I know advocates are very divided on this issue of whether or not to have PowerPoints, for example.
Yes, I have to say I have a slight bee in my bonnet on this. As far as PowerPoints are concerned, don't get me wrong, I don't think there's a right or wrong thing in absolute terms. And whilst I can sort of see the attraction of using PowerPoints as a demonstrative in order to aid your presentation, I don't personally like to use PowerPoints, I have to confess, because I much more enjoy the dialogue I have with the arbitrators or with the witness, and I feel a little less constrained, straitjacketed if I'm having a free-flow conversation. As far as visual aids are concerned, I think it's important, at least my own view, is to remember that they are visual aids. They are meant to aid, facilitate your presentation, as opposed to being the predominant aspect of your presentation. I think too often I sometimes find, even especially when I'm sitting as arbitrator, so I tend to notice these things more, is there are some counsel who treat the visual aids as anything other than an aid, where they are almost literally burying their nose in the PowerPoint presentation, looking up only occasionally just to draw breath, to make sure that everyone else is still alive and listening to them. And even when, I was sitting recently in London a couple of weeks ago, and we tried to, my colleagues and I on the tribunal tried to discourage one of the counsel from reading off their PowerPoint presentation. Should we ask them questions? So they're thinking that this would engage them into having a dialogue with us. All that succeeded in achieving